Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event hosted by the International Inequalities Institute. My name's Sam Friedman. I'm a professor of sociology at LSE here in the sociology department. Director of the MSc in Inequalities and Social Sciences at the Institute, and also a member of the Institute's research program on wealth, elites, and tax justice, an area which tonight's event, of course, very much speaks to. I'm incredibly pleased to be chairing tonight's lecture, which, as you know, is titled The Gender of Capital: How Families Perpetuate Wealth Inequality. Our speakers for today are Professor Céline Bessière, Dr. Sibylle Gollac, and Dr. Sarah Trotter. Céline Bessière is a professor of sociology at Paris Dauphine University, and she is the author of From Generation to Generation, a book on cognac wine-growing family businesses. Sibylle Gollac is a research fellow in sociology at the French National Center for Scientific Research, and her PhD dissertation focused on the real estate strategies of contemporary French families. Together, Céline and Sibylle study the material, economic, and legal dimensions of family, in particular through the analysis of inheritance and family breakdown and marital breakdown. Their research is at the crossroads of several fields: sociology of law and justice, sociology of gender and family, and economic sociology. Sarah Trotter joined LSE Law School as an assistant professor in September 2018. Her areas of interest are family law and European human rights law, and she's particularly interested in the assumptions that are made in law about how we relate to one another and ourselves. Please note we have a live captioner and BSL interpreters at tonight's event, which you can see online and in person. Tonight's event will run for about an hour and a half, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Our speakers will present for around an hour, and as usual, there'll be chances for the audience to pose questions in the final 30 minutes of the event. And we'll be taking questions from both online and in person. Online attendees can ask questions throughout by utilizing the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Please state your name and affiliation where possible. And just to say, the next public event to be held at the III is titled Unfree Migrant Domestic Labor in the Middle East, and it will take place at 6:30 on Wednesday, the 5th of October. Many thanks, and hope you all enjoy the event. And I will hand over now, without further ado, to Céline and Sibylle. Thanks.
We would like to thank Mike Savage for initiating this conference, and also thanks to Sam Friedman for chairing this event, and to Sarah Trotter for discussing our book. We would like also to thank Peter Kane and Lisa Ryan and Emma Secato for all the organization of this conference. Okay. So it's a great privilege to present here. So it's a great privilege to discuss this research with you and to show you for the first time the jacket of the English version of our book. You've got to be patient. It will be out the 7th of March for the International Women's Day. The demonstration of our book starts from a double observation. First, wealth inequality between families has increased globally since the 80s, even more than income inequality. In 2021, the wealthiest 10% owns more than 3/4 of global wealth, whereas the bottom 50% owns a mere 2%. In uncertain times characterized by precarity in working and personal life, the ability of storing wealth has become a key defining feature of contemporary existence. Wealth inequality is becoming the main indicator of the widening gap between the super rich and the rest of society, and the lack of savings and assets becomes a reliable measure of poverty. Wealth brings income and gives access to credit, self-employment, higher education, and housing. Home ownership is a mark of social distinction if one can afford the right address. Wealth is also crucial for living standards in the old age. Wealth contributes more and more to the definition of the social position all over the life.
There are two different ways of constituting wealth, by putting money aside or by inheriting it. Inheritance represented 70% to 80% of the private wealth held by individuals in the Europe until 1910. But these levels then plummeted with the two world wars, only to rise again later. Inheritance represented 30–40% of the private wealth held by Europeans in the 50s, 80s, but it is currently over 60%. We are certainly a long way from the 1910s, but if current economic and demographic trends continue, the inherited portion of wealth will only increase over the 21st century. It is more and more difficult for individuals without inheritance to become members of the wealthier classes solely of their earnings from work. Inheritance is a family issue. This is self-evident in France. The civil code and public financing favor wealth transfers to direct descendants. Children cannot be disinherited, and the transfers they receive are only modestly taxed. The resurgence of inheritance is tantamount to a return of the family as a key actor of the economy, contributing to socioeconomic inequality and reinforcing the boundaries between families of different class and racial backgrounds. These family transfers therefore play a central role in the reproduction of social inequalities, not only for the very wealthy people, but more broadly through different social classes. Our second observation concerns the gender wealth gap. The distribution of wealth by gender has received increasing attention. This gender gap is still strong in many countries. However, documenting the gender distribution of assets is difficult because of the way information about individual ownership and control of assets is tangled together in different sex couples. Most of the data on wealth are collected at the level of the household, either through surveys or tax data, rather than at the individual level. High-quality wealth surveys describing each member of a household's individual ownership are very rare and are hard to come by, but there is two exceptions. The first is a German socioeconomic panel study that measures a significant gender wealth gap in Germany, not only between single men and women, but also within unmarried and married couples. And the second one is the French wealth survey. In France, since 1998, the French wealth survey includes self-reported information regarding the value and the declared ownership of assets within the household, as well as information on the matrimonial property regimes. Studies based on this survey show that the gender wealth gap is widening in France. Between 1998 and 2015, the gender wealth gap almost doubled from 9% of the population in wealth to 16%. This increase concerns both singles and couples. Socioeconomic literature has explored three sets of explanations of the gender wealth gap. First, women and men have been found to have systematically different portfolio structures. They save and invest differently with diverging levels of return. The second and dominant explanation for the gender wealth gap is the gender division of labor that occurs both in the household and on the labor market. It's the main explanation of the wide gender wealth gap in Germany and is closing in the 2000s. So, in France, women earn 25% less than men and women living in France, women earn 25% less than men. And a woman living in a couple, married or not, earns 42% less on average than her partner. And the more children they have, the wider this income gap is. A third explanation of the gender wealth gap insists on the legal frame in which men and women hold their assets, which depends on marital status transitions and laws governing family and property. Many studies show that single-headed households accumulate less wealth than married households. There also exists a marital disruption penalty to wealth accumulation, especially for women. Laws governing marital property and divorce play an important part in gender wealth accumulation. In France, the standard default marriage regime is the communauté de biens réduite aux acquis, a partial community property. Assets belonging to each prior to marriage or received as inheritance or a family gift after the marriage remain individually owned, and assets acquired by one or both after marriage belong to both equally. When the marriage is dissolved by the death of one partner or through legal separation, the community property is divided into equal shares. But in France, fewer couples in the younger generation are choosing to marry. In France today, partners tend to favor simple cohabitation or civil union, which both leave asset management to the individual. An increasing share of married couples, especially the wealthier ones, sign separate property contracts. Moreover, the number of marital breakdowns has stabilized at a high level, with a total divorce rate of 44 divorces for 100 marriages. As shown by Nicolas Frémaux and Marion Le Turc, these evolutions are part of a trend of individualization of wealth in France that contributes to the widening of the gender wealth gap. Individualizations benefits men because the gender labor income inequality is still strong, and therefore does not allow the same rate of wealth accumulation for men and women. Therefore, gender wealth gap is linked to the forms of marital unions and to the gender division of labor in different sex couples. To understand gender wealth gap, it is necessary to analyze what happens in the family. To do this, we first decided to focus our analysis on two crucial moments: the breakdowns of a marriage or unmarried relationship, and estate planning and settlement. Second, we decided not to focus our analysis on the law in the book, but on the law in practice. In France, inheritance is supposed to be equally shared among daughters and sons since the Napoleonic Code in 1804. I'm sorry, it's a joke with Céline, because it's very hard for me to read numbers. Since 1985, spouses are formally treated in an equal way. All mentions of husband and wife have disappeared from the civil code concerning assets. France has a gender-neutral law concerning asset ownership. We wanted to understand how inequality is perpetuated despite a formally equal law. Third, we try to hold an intersectional perspective. Certain social classes monopolize wealth and work to preserve it among themselves from one generation to the next, while other classes are persistently deprived of it. At the same time, women accumulate less wealth than men. Class inequality and gender inequality are intertwined. Our work is based first and foremost on the idea that the family is an economic institution. This is an idea that we take from Marxist and materialist feminists as Federici or Dauphine, as well as from economic sociologists as Bessière. First, the family produces wealth. If household production were to be taken into account, the GDP in 2010 would have been 63% higher in the UK, 33% larger in France. This invisible household production is largely carried out by women and for free. In France, among couples with children, women worked on average 54 hours per week, 34 hours of unpaid housework and 20 hours of professional activity. Within the same households, men worked only 51 hours, 3 hours less per week. Men devoted on average 18 hours per week to unpaid housework and 33 hours to professional activities. In the end, women worked a bit more, but are paid much less. This is one of the reasons for the gender wealth gap. But family also organizes wealth circulation, control, and evaluation to ensure its reproduction and transmission from one generation to the next. Our work shows how these family economic arrangements do not lead to a redistribution of wealth between women and men, but on the contrary, to the maintenance of wealth in the hands of men. How do we investigate family economic arrangements? First, we carried out in-depth family case studies based on repeated observations and interviews with groups of kin. We have followed some families for over 10 years. Because family case studies cannot be used to research a large number of people, and because they make it difficult to compare different social classes, we combine them with statistics, particularly data arising from the French Household Wealth Survey. Estate planning and marital breakdowns are strictly legally codified. These are matters of family, fiscal, and civil law. Our research thus brought us into other locations, the offices of family practice lawyers and notaries and family courts. With a large research team, we observed meetings with clients and hearings. We interviewed legal professionals and built a database from 4,000 court files. Unfortunately, tonight I don't have time to tell you the story of the Renoir family, for example, who lives in this charming village. But family case studies show it is difficult to understand the economic arrangement observed in a particular family and the acceptance of those arrangements by various family members without also discussing family strategies of social reproduction. According to Pierre Bourdieu and Jean-Claude Passeron, reproduction describes those mechanisms that preserve social hierarchy over long periods, as well as maintaining the distribution of positions within that hierarchy. In daily life, individuals, parents, for example, establish family strategies that maintain or improve their kin, and especially their children's social status. These family strategies of social reproduction can be of several types: marriage strategies, fertility strategies, estate planning, academic strategies, and so forth. In the 60s, Bourdieu studied the farming society in southwestern France. We described the early choice of a male successor who will carry on the family's social status, pass on the name, and become the privileged heir to its wealth. This masculine inheritance privilege, which many seem to think had died out with the decline of nobility and peasantry, is still visible within the overall population of France, even if contemporary families have to pass on economic and cultural capital that are inextricably linked. In the Renoir family, it was the son who inherited the clientele of his accounting parents. It was the eldest grandson who went with his grandmother to the lawyer's office when the business was sold. His sister Claire tells me thus, in mom's family, boys are always favored over girls. So Jean-Paul is my grandmother's favorite son. We all agree on that. Just like Sylvain, his brother, was my mother's favorite son for a long time. It's just like Sally Claus. It's unbelievable. In the 14th century, jurists working for the royal family in France drug up an article of Sally Claus to justify a ban on women ascending to the throne of France. So, the French Household Wealth Survey permits some generalization. In 2015, for the children of the self-employed, inheritances and inter vivos gifts received by males are more often composed of professional assets than those received by females. The gap is even wider if compared between transfers to all daughters and transfers to firstborn sons. I don't mean the eldest child, but the first male among siblings. But these differences in the types of assets being transferred, then based on sex category and birth order, do not only concern either small business families or professional assets. For all households, inter vivos gifts and inheritances destined for sons, and even more so for firstborn sons, are significantly more likely to include real estate. The same is true for land and securities. Sons, and especially firstborn sons, get priority for specific assets, business and securities, houses, land, as opposed to the transfer of money. Thus, 49% of all estate transfers to daughters consist entirely of money, against a similar transfer to 45% of sons. These differences can seem to be trivial differences, but they always work in the same direction. And this is also because statistics average out very different situations. In some families, all the children are male or female. Situations arise where there is no room to make choices in the inheritance, where all of the assets are liquid, or where the only asset is a piece of real estate and no heir can afford to buy out the others, and therefore it must be sold. The specific role of sons, and especially of firstborn sons, manifests itself not only in the nature of the assets received, but in the timing of when they are transferred. Sons are more likely to receive their lot before daughters in the form of inter vivos gifts. These forms represent 33% of all estate transfers received by women, against 38% of those received by men. To receive such an endowment early in life is an obvious advantage in the further accumulation of wealth during a lifetime. Moreover, family case studies and statistical results show that among different sex couples, these unequal positions of husbands and wives within their families of origin, and the age gap between spouses and the gender inequalities of job markets all work together to confer on men greater economic and social power over their partners. The moment of separation reveals the economic inequalities that are women into different sex domestic relationships. It also amplifies pre-existing inequalities. Even today, the cost of breakdown is mainly paid by women. In 2015 French wealth survey, being separated rather than in a couple greatly reduced the likelihood of being a homeowner, all other things being equal. This correlation is significantly higher for women than it is for men. How can we explain the importance of this mechanism in a society in which the rights of female and male heirs and spouses are formally equal? Céline will tell.
Okay, so next, we enter the offices of legal professionals, where family economic arrangements are discreetly formalized in legal language and made official. Family members may meet various legal professionals who will help them to domesticate family and property law to an extent which depends on their social class. Legal counsel is divided into two professions in France, and both may be involved in family economic affairs, depending on the complexity of a situation and the assets involved. These are notaries and lawyers. I have to spend a bit of time on notaries because you might not be familiar to this profession, which is particularly strong in civil law countries like France. So notaries are specialized in contracts and fiscal law, and they are legally mandated to evaluate and distribute family assets. They draw up and settle wills, they manage the transfer of deeds in property transaction, they draft prenuptial agreements, oversee the liquidation of marital property, and much more. Unlike lawyers, they do not represent one client, but they act for both parties more like mediators. Notaries are legally mandated by the Ministry of Justice, and as such, they are agents of the state whose role is to serve the public. They also, and it is a paradox, they they collect tax. And at the same time, they give advice to their clients, and especially their best clients, in matter of tax optimization. So you see the paradox. So they are agents of the Ministry of Justice, but they are hardly civil servants. For one thing, they can buy, sell, and transfer their practices. Being a notary also permits them to have a commercial function as consultants for which they can set their own fees. Regardless of the type of service, they have a duty to advise. In principle, notaries have to explain all possible options to their clients, as well as the consequences of the documents that they will sign. So we met notaries in different parts of France, in big cities, in the Parisian area, as well as in the country. And we show in the book that depending on the social background of their clientele, they offer different services according to the level of wealth of their clients. Notaries have the predominant role in successions, since only 5% of successions are taken to court in France. This means that the vast majority of family assets distributions upon the occasion of a death happens in the offices of notaries. Notaries are fond of presenting themselves as asset doctors and guarantors of family peace. So we study also the work of family lawyers. So here I can be maybe briefer because you might know what is a family lawyer. So they represent their clients in court or by or doing private ordering. Although notaries' offices are the main site for implementing the law governing the circulation of family assets, lawyers also regularly get involved. Their mission is maybe clearer, it's to defend their clients' rights. Like notaries, lawyers are self-employed and their work is heavily regulated, the state entrusting lawyers with a monopoly of the defense of private individuals and businesses in the court. However, the profession of notary and lawyer are both even more strictly controlled by their respective professional organizations. Unlike notaries, lawyers set their own fees, except in the case of legal aid clients whose cases are paid for according to a national rate in France. We show also in the book that the lawyer-client relationship from cooperation to delegation takes different forms in different social classes, depending on the size of law firms, the socio-economic backgrounds of the clients, and the way lawyers are paid, depending on the amount of their fees or the fact that they might receive legal aid vouchers. So we define family wealth arrangements, which is one of the main concepts of our book, as the oftentimes laborious or conflictual consensus building process among family members and legal professionals over the appraisal and distribution of family wealth, as well as the outcome of the process. We use this term to designate situations with tensions that are not resolved by a unilateral imposition of one point of view, the law of the strongest, nor by a harmonious accord arising from family relations where everyone seems to agree, like one common point of view. So it's something in between. Arrangements require multiple people, they cannot be made by one person, and several points of view that needed to be reconciled. From a temporal perspective, arrangements are never completely finished. Making arrangements is a perpetual process that outlasts their legal and moral formalization, whose results are only temporary. So this concept goes beyond the legal opposition between agreement and contention by providing a finer description of the social production of consensus, including when the latter is fragile and temporary. The closed doors of the notaries or lawyers' offices are what make it possible for clients and their counsel to come to arrangements in the shadow of the law. You might know this expression, in the shadow of the law, that was used by two American law professors, Munkin and Kornhauser, who showed the influence of case law on divorces, even undisputed ones, that were negotiating between lawyers. In their study, so in the United States, the prospect of going to court, which the spouses were trying by all means to avoid through negotiation, strongly limited the demands of both parties. Here, we adapt and expand this notion to highlight the extent to which the family wealth arrangements formalized by lawyers and notaries at the time of divorce, but also at the time of succession, are based in the law and meet its requirements, but also make it possible to work around or even evade the spirit of the law. So the work of notaries and lawyers exacerbates economic inequality between social classes by aiding and abetting the maintenance and transfer of wealth within the most affluent families, while simultaneously serving to conceal, endorse, and legitimate the gender wealth gap. So to understand that, we need to study how legal professionals count. So here it is, like notary papers. So the partition of estates and the liquidation of conjugal assets are moments of formalized accounting. This accounting may look neutral and technical, but actually what we show is that it incorporates gender norms that ultimately favor men, especially those from higher economic classes. This sexist accounting does not necessarily come from a conscious or explicit will of legal professionals to dispossess women of their property, but it does contribute to further entrenching gender inequality in practice. So let's understand that through how notaries and lawyers count. So here, like when you have like estate partitioning, like at the moment of marital breakdown or at the moment of inheritance, when you look at like the notary acts, there is a kind of a implicit, very simple sequence of operations. Like you have the feeling that it is like first an inventory of the asset, a list. Second, a valuation of the assets, like an amount, so in France, in euros. And then third, like addition and division, like among heirs or among like two spouses at the moment of marital breakdown. And so a distribution of the assets, and then a compensation in euros, like if need be, like if one has more than the share that should theoretically would be his or hers, then there is compensation in money. So we read many acts like this, and you have like this kind of implicit logic of this document. Okay, so you remember that it's on the left. What happens in practice is exactly the opposite. Like that's why we call this reversed accounting. In practice, first, keen and legal professionals seek a consensus on the final result of the sharing of the process. When they enter the notary office, they already know like who will keep the house, who will get the family business. So the distribution is first, okay? Second, they determine the inventory of assets. In other words, what should be included on and what should be left out of the list of assets and the value that should be given to each of these assets. So here it's like in a 40-minute presentation, we don't have time to dig into cases, but in the book, there are like many cases when like you have like people in the family, like all the brothers and sisters, they know that at the moment of the succession of their parents, something was not counted in the notary act. They all know, even the notary. And there is also a lot of like play on the amounts, like what is the value of the family house, for instance. And you will understand that it's you might have an interest to undervalue some assets, especially real estate assets, because of course there is also a tax dimension to that. So if it's a bit undervalued, then you pay less tax. Okay, so in successions and marital liquidations, so you understand the reversed accounting thing, like it's distribution first, and then inventory and valuation second. So that's why we call this reversed accounting. In successions and marital liquidations alike, reversed accounting is an instrument that allows notaries, in collaboration with lawyers, to validate wealth arrangements that are part of family strategies of social reproduction, all the while purporting to be in compliance with the law. Rather than explicitly unequal treatments of heirs or spouses, notaries and lawyers prefer the flexible technique they use in the secrecy of their offices. They mainly work with the inventories and valuations of assets. Reversed accounting is a discrete technique. It is discreetly implemented behind the closed doors of notaries and lawyers' offices, and it is at the discretion of legal professionals versant in property rights. In other words, they may use it when necessary. So the technical complexity of this type of accounting, expressed in complicated legal language, obscures its political stake. Okay. So if reversed accounting contributes to the widening of the wealth gap between men and women, it is because all property is not equal. So here you need to connect with what Sibylle mentioned before. We saw that certain families have assets that must be kept, that are more symbolically and economically important and preferentially passed along to sons, the firstborn son. The nature of these assets varies according to the family situation and social background. It can be an investment portfolio of stocks and bonds in the wealthiest family, like, for instance, Amazon stock in the Bezos family, for example, or a family business or professional property, like in the Pilon's bakery. Oh no, you didn't present it, the Pilon. It's a interesting case in the book. Of like the sisters were paid their the Pilon's bakery, like the bakery was passed on to the son, and the sisters get pain au chocolat, croissant in as a compensation. So and baguettes. And for 10 years they actually counted it. Okay, so it can be like the most important thing, like the family business or professional property, a family home, land, etc., vacation home, like it is in the Renoir family, like there is a story of the vacation home. So each of these assets can be described as the structuring asset in the estate. They define the framework upon which legal professionals build family wealth arrangements. Reversed accounting makes these assets the starting point and keystone of all calculations. Once a notary knows who will get the structuring asset, he or she establishes acceptable financial or in-kind compensation for the other heirs. Statistical data shows that only eldest sons receive more of these structuring assets that must be kept, as well as more gifts in advance than daughters or subsequent sons. Our observations in notaries' offices demonstrate that this distribution of family wealth, structuring assets for some, compensation for the others, is far from being economically egalitarian, even if on paper it looks like it is, and even if also in statistical surveys. Okay, do I still have time? Is that okay? Okay, so the next question is, why do notaries act like this and family lawyers? So these are pictures from the official French website of the notaries. So pass on the structuring assets to the heir. So, so you see blue sky, son, father and sons, and you can check there is no equivalent with like pink and mother and daughters. So pass on the structuring assets to the heir or former spouse who seems best able to manage, preserve, and pass them on. Notaries generally have a gendered and socially situated conception of the rightful heir, as you can see on their website. that fits that of propertied families. They are particularly attached to ensuring the continuity of family businesses because they themselves come from families that owned their own business and profited from significant gifts of professional assets in order to practice there. The economic morality of such families, which try to pass their entire professional property on to one of their heirs, thus aligns with the economic morality of these professionals of property law. Also, many notaries imagine the rightful heir to be male, and in family transfer to normally be from father to son. Do the legal professionals that we follow consciously try to favor men over women? We think that this question of intentionality is probably not the right one to ask. Because reversed accounting is what Pierre Bourdieu calls a logic of practice, an incorporated system of disposition that, without forming an intention, is nonetheless able to orient practices in a systematic way, in a coherent way. Gendered representations of the social order run throughout this mode of accounting around the definition of the rightful heir and the good business owner, the reasonable widow and the good mother, and the conceptions of which property should be passed on the family line and which may be passed along to a wife. Economic transfers between relatives bear the traces of a kind of subconscious sexism incorporated in the very way legal professionals and legal professionals like notaries and lawyers calculate, conceal, and legitimize them under the law. And if they act like this, it is to, you remember I said that they consider themselves as the doctor of family, the doctor of property. They do that to protect the consensus of family relations. So here you might think that French legal professionals are kind of crazy or super sexist and all that. We start to travel a bit and then we realize that here it's in Germany, like the website, the page of the German notaries and inheritances and gift. Okay, so we have to discuss that about like what do notary do here in the UK? Are they kind of equivalent? And you will let us know where we can check on the internet to find the relevant equivalent pages. Okay, if I have just one more minute, I would like to speak a bit about a very important topic, which is tax and tax avoidance, because in our book, we show the central role of taxation in producing this so important family piece, which can take very different forms, depending, of course, on the class background, but which is usually unfavorable to women. So I would like to tell you the story of this woman, whose name is Sarah Proslow. So she's the wife of the Finnish entrepreneur Robert Österlund, and she had the great luck of having the Panama Papers scandal erupt during her divorce proceedings in Canada. She and her lawyers discovered that her husband had a fortune worth $4,000 million US, much more than the few million he claimed. So their in-depth investigation in connection with the divorce led them to deconstruct the arcana of a financial empire composed of offshore companies, trust in the Cook Islands, and shell corporations in the Bahamas and other tax havens worldwide. And that's why her story was in the New York Times magazine. So of course, this kind of international scale financial engineering only concerns the greatest of fortunes. But as we have seen in our studies, many wives, daughters, and sisters of businessmen, members of the professions, and even shopkeepers and farmers may, at the time of divorce or succession, find themselves not knowing exactly what the family net worth is. When this happens, they have trouble asserting their rights over wealth that they can barely measure or get acknowledged. So tax optimization, concealment, and sometimes outright fraud like this, implemented by legal and financial management professionals, block the legal compensation mechanism serving women who are kept away from wealth management. the table here on the right is not from us, but from one of our colleagues, Camille Erlin-Giré. And she shows that, so she studied the same French wealth survey as us, and she did something very simple. She checked out who responded to the survey. And the instruction from INSEE, like the National Statistic Office in France, is the one who should answer the survey is the most knowledgeable of the management of household assets among interviewed couples. And then she realized that the wealthier the couple, the more often it was a man who answered the survey. So it says something about the fact that the wealthier people are, the more women are kept aside wealth management. And we show in our book, I don't have time here, and also a lot of colleagues showed that through ethnography, that on the contrary, in poor families, money problems are women's problem directly. Okay, so like a few words of conclusion, but I think what is most interesting is the discussion that we will have together. But 3 short points. The first one is like a kind of a methodological issue, like we need to improve household declarative wealth surveys to better measure the gender wealth gap. We have we're facing a major problem here, like is the fact that household is an obstruction to the knowledge of the gender wealth gap, and there are very few countries where you can, in an accurate way, measure it. So we have like an avenue of research here in many countries. The second point is about tax policy. Like, of course, we are in favor of taxation of income and taxation of wealth, but we think that tax policy it's not enough to only think about like taxes like this. We also need to think about like the institutions. Like if you think about what I said about notaries, like this very powerful profession, which is in many countries in the world, collect tax and at the same time give advices to wealthy and mostly white men, advices to pay less tax, then you realize that here you have a problem. So we need to think also about the institutions, and we realize through our studies that, of course, we're not the only ones to show that, is that the more people own, the more people are wealthy, own economic capital, the more they also have many resources to maintain their social status, including they are surrounded by a lot of professionals, like wealth professionals, and here legal professionals who help them to keep their wealth. The last point is the fact that gender, so we try in our book to show that gender is at the heart of the contemporary class-based society, that class, you cannot think about, I mean, this is a good place to say that, like in the like we cannot think about inequalities like this, thinking only about class or thinking only about gender. You need at least to think those two aspects together. But we think also that there are avenues of research for an intersectional approach of wealth inequality. We have a hard time in France to study also racial inequality that are linked to gender and wealth, and gender and class, and that we think like we should go more in this direction. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. That was fascinating. So we'll proceed now to Sarah's going to offer some comments and reflections on the talk.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here this evening to discuss with you this magnificent book, which as we've heard, sorry. Oh, sorry. Did you hear any of that? Should I start again? Oh. Yeah? Okay. The book, as we've heard, offers a number of insights into the way in which families arrange their lives and their resources, and the way in which these arrangements can perpetuate inequalities, wealth inequalities. Thank you. Thanks. So, I read the book from the perspective of someone with an interest in the way in which law imagines the family and the kinds of assumptions that are made in law about families and family life. And one of the particularly interesting things about the book in that sense to me was the set of ideas, assumptions, forms of relating, and ways of thinking in relation to the family and law that emerge in the book as shaping and underpinning the perpetuation of wealth inequality through families. And so I thought that this evening I'd focus my response to the book, which is really my reading of the book, on that. And I'm going to say, firstly, something about the way in which the book invites us to think about the family, then something about what the book tells us about law, and then finally I'll suggest that the conclusions that are reached in relation to law in this book are so fundamental that really they call for a rethinking of family law, aspects of family law. So as we've heard, the book begins with the idea of the family as an economic institution. And what this entails most fundamentally is a deconstruction of the family as a category of analysis, and a focus instead on individuals within the family, and more specifically on the economic transfers that go on between family members. Tracking these transfers in the way in which the authors do, so through extensive family histories, as we've heard, and through interviews with different family members, reveals most immediately the way in which these transfers are always about more than money and property. There are also places in which questions of belonging, identity, and of what it means to be in a family play out. But tracking these transfers also, as we've heard, reveals the degree to which the wealth gap between women and men is perpetuated in family relationships, and also produced in family relationships in some contexts. This is particularly acute in the context of couple relationships, where inequalities relating to labour, care work, and wealth are frequently held and then exposed very starkly on separation. The question that then arises in relation to those cases is what, if anything, can be done about that, including from a legal perspective? And I'll come back to that later on. Alongside the insight that the book offers into inequalities relating to couple relationships, the book also shows the extent to which inequality can be a feature of relationships within the original family, including sibling relationships, and also relationships between adult children and parents. This is an especially illuminating strand of the book, insofar as these relationships have tended to be overlooked in the literature, particularly in the family law literature, and arguably also by the discipline of family law itself, which has tended to focus really on relationships between couples and relationships between parents and minor children. The book offers a new lens on relationships within the original family, highlighting the degree to which inequalities relating to wealth can take root in this context, and emerge most acutely in contexts of inheritance and in relation to the making of economic arrangements in and around a parent's death. These inequalities seem to be driven most forcefully by assumptions about birth order and sex category, but they're also driven by the idea that a family holds of itself, or rather the idea that those who are making the arrangements within a family hold of the family. Concrete examples of an early embedding of inequality in this sense include where children are socialised differently from the outset, as where, for example, there's a very early expectation that an eldest son will inherit a family business, and we've heard some examples of that. And of course, any inequalities that emerge and develop in the context of the original family are subsequently carried further down the line too into other relationships, including couple relationships. And they're not just carried down the line, the authors show too how intergenerational economic transfers exacerbate social class divisions, insofar as the way in which the transfers are conceived of and enacted are significantly shaped by class and assumptions relating to class. The family emerges as a much wider actor in that sense, but critically, it doesn't do so alone. So the book shows the degree to which ways of thinking and assumptions within a family, particularly about sex category and birth order, shape arrangements that perpetuate inequality, but these arrangements and the family histories around them are also shaped by law. So what does the book tell us about law? Well, the question of law in this context is in part one of how family histories are rendered in law in the legal moments of inheritance and separation that are the focus of the book. Legal narratives have a hold. They write out other possible narratives. And so how a story is told in law, the legal version of that story, really matters. One of the examples that is alluded to in the book in this respect is the rendering of various family histories in the masculine, something that was considered by the legal professionals in question to be a guarantee of gender neutrality, but that in practice further emphasized the gendered version of family history that was being legally written. The other side to the question of law in this context is of how family histories are shaped by and interact with law in the first place. This includes how family histories are shaped by assumptions that are held within families and held by individual family members about their own legal position and about the law itself. Research has consistently shown the degree to which assumptions are commonly made about things like how property is held within a couple and also legal status, particularly in contexts of unmarried cohabitation. The authors tap into this research and show how arrangements are also shaped by how families and family members relate to law, and how these ways of relating are shaped by class, gender, and also different degrees of socialization in family law and property law. These different ways of relating to law, which are linked to social background, are mirrored on the account offered by the book by the different and unequal ways of engaging with clients on the part of legal professionals. Moreover, in all cases and across social classes, a range of accounting techniques, as we've heard, and assumptions are shown to shape the way in which law is practiced in this context. These techniques are primarily about, and I quote, playing with the accounting, making it possible to mold family economic arrangements within the legal framework. The assumptions that emerge as being held and expressed by the legal professionals in the research relate mostly to family relationships and roles within the family and expectations about those roles. We've heard some examples already, but the examples recounted more broadly in the book range from the gendered and socially situated conception of the rightful heir that notaries typically hold, to the assumptions that are cast as being bound up in the apparent disinclination of judges to use the legal tools that would compensate for economic inequalities between members of a separating couple. The implication is that these techniques and assumptions operate to undermine the formally egalitarian legal framework that family law and property law offer. The implication is that law itself, and more specifically, the way in which it's used, is a means through which inequality is perpetuated through families. This is important in what it tells us about the underpinnings of family wealth arrangements, but it also suggests a way through which involves rethinking aspects of family law. In that sense, the book has for family law a transformative potential, and that's where it becomes quite hopeful on my reading. Over and over, the authors come back to the question of, and I quote, how is it that despite a formally egalitarian legal framework, family wealth arrangements usually enrich men and impoverish women? How is it, they ask, that a formally egalitarian law cannot manage to curb this fundamental inequality? There's a clear sense from the book that there needs to be far more emphasis placed on the thinking of legal professionals in these cases and the role that that thinking plays. But underlying the book also, I think, is the sense that law itself could be used differently, particularly perhaps in contexts of couple separation and in contexts of couple relationships more broadly, actually, including the way in which people hold property and relate to property from the outset. The sense is that the tools are there to correct for, or at least to mitigate for, some of the inequalities that have been embedded in relationships and that are sharpened on separation. The question would then be one of rethinking the way in which rethinking the way in which family law and property law were practiced in the histories recounted in the book, and the way in which they're perhaps practiced today more widely. But even setting aside that question, even setting aside the possibility of a rethinking of family law, I think the book invites us to think more deeply about a broader question, which we can maybe come to in the discussion. And that's the question of the extent to which, if at all, the solution to any of this lies in law. And I'll leave it there.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for a set of very insightful comments. So we've got about 25 or so minutes for questions, and I will open the floor. So we'll take questions from both in here and online. We'll do one each. So who wants to kick us off in the room? Yeah, the back. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This talk was incredibly interesting. What I was wondering, which kind of ties into your last point, Dr. Trotter, was you discussed a need for policy, legal, institutional change, but I'm wondering where you see a cultural shift fitting into that, and whether you think that this would happen, where it would fit in between the legal frameworks and the institutional change. Is there influence from social movements, that sort of thing?
So shall we answer?
Yeah, you answer and then we'll.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Like, yeah, it's in line with yours. Like, what is the solution? Is there a cultural shift? Maybe is there hope somewhere for things to change? Okay, one of the thing we wanted to do in this book was to kind of politicize a question which was never politicized, and in a certain way is kind of pessimistic to show that like a lot of people, I guess, maybe not in this room, but yeah, maybe in this room to think that gender equality is on a kind of a avenue. I mean, it goes slow, but one day or another we will get there, you know, like women are, we know that women are more and more educated, like even, I mean, in France, like it's obvious, like women have more diplomas than men, and they get better salaries. In some, you can expect that like the glass ceiling in some professions will be, you know, I mean, we will manage to do this. Even if we know at the same time that there is like a gender pay gap. Here, what we show is like a bit different, like the gender wealth gap, at least in our country where we can measure it, it's getting wider and wider. So it's not like kind of it's kind of pessimistic in a certain way. And we think it is because like what is going on inside the family is not politicized enough. I mean, you know that a major claim of the feminist movement is the fact that private is political, but still we could do the history of the feminist movement, and in many places in the world, like in France, feminists thought that the solution was with occupation, professional education, closing the gender pay gap. It was here. What we show is that there are plenty of things going on in the family, and that we should not neglect what is going on there, because you might think that there is a kind of a tale of equality which would be already there. And this tale is very dangerous, because when you finishing the book, we realized that because of the norm of equality and a lot of people thinking that equality is already there, then you don't fight for equality anymore, and even you let things happen, especially in the family, that getting worse for women. So in a certain way, equality norms produce inequality in practice. So I'm sorry, the shift is not so good, but we think that one step is to put that on the public table and having a conversation about that. And we think indeed that legal professionals can play a role. In France, lawyers, some lawyers read our book, some notaries did as well. And we think that, yeah, there are things that can be done in the way of practicing family law, but also in the families. I mean, like, maybe you want to add something to?
Yes, we have some good news also. When we
talk with lawyers. For example, in France, there is more and more lawyers who are specialists of domestic violence. They are fighting against domestic violence, and when we tell our stories, they say, "Oh, yes, there are also something to do with economic inequalities between men and women," and say, "Oh, okay, you know, family law divorces for us, it's annoying. We are not interested, but no, now we are interested. Perhaps we are trying to change these things for women." So we have also some good news, and it's for us. We are sociologists, we are scientists, and when we have these discussions with lawyers, it's you know, you think, oh, I've done this family case studies. It was very long. It was very hard. It was some families in France, but it's important, and perhaps it will help to change something.
Thank you. So we're going to go for a question from the online, which I think Peter's going to deliver.
Okay, so Amy from LSE has asked a question online. Regarding the notaries and lawyers, were all of the cases you observed male notaries and lawyers, or did you encounter women too? And if so, were women more neutral in their accounting and practices?
We met some female notaries. There are in France, all legal professions there is a lot of female lawyers and female judges. In France, in family courts, it's 3/4 of female judges. And within family lawyers, yes, most of family lawyers in France are female. For notaries, it's very specific. It's the most well-paid profession, and it's the profession where there is less women. But there is some women, and they are like male notaries. They come from families where there is a business. Sometimes it was a family of notaries, but sometimes it was a family of I don't know, pharmacists or physicians, and so money is important, and the family business is important, and so they think like male notaries, and it's what is very interesting when we discuss with lawyers and notaries. That's a very important idea that Céline has said before. It's that they don't think that what they are doing is sexist. They don't see it. And when we show them numbers, you know, when you say in France, in different sex couples, women are more educated than men, but there is an income gap of 42% in couples. Oh, okay. When they see the numbers with the hours of unpaid work, and also they okay, all the cases that we see when the woman is there, I want sorry, Céline, pension alimentaire, an alimony. And she's annoying. What's it important? It's the kids. The kids are good. So why is she fighting for 20 euros? And when they see the numbers, they say, okay, there is perhaps something behind all these cases. When the woman is very important, the women are always the one that are asking something. They need an alimony because they keep the children. And they are asking something, so they are annoying, and so we have to change the way lawyers are seeing their clients, their female clients.
Yeah, basically we show that feminization. I mean, of course, we are for the feminization of legal professions, but it's not enough.
it doesn't change the practice.
Hi, thank you for the session. It was amazing. I'll just give a little bit of context. I come from India, and we have a law that actually says you should, like, you are a part, like, as a daughter, you are a 50% part of your father's and like mother's property, right? But unfortunately, we are made to believe that I don't deserve that, like it's not mine, because the law says it, I should take it. So if the parents don't give the property to the, don't gift the property, or like not allowed to inherit the property to the daughter, they never go to the, like they don't go and like take advantage of the law, right? Just because they're made to believe this is the thing. So did you actually face this kind of a thing? Like what's your experience with the women who are not allowed to like inherit properties? Like, do they believe they actually deserve it? And do they fight for it? And if yes, if you have seen someone like fighting for it, like how is the response in the family? Like I have seen people getting disowned, so yeah.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Like, why don't women protest more about that? Actually, what we realized is that, so it's in family case studies that we realized that doing all these interviews, because we did like multiple interviews, sometimes it was on a very long period, seeing people many times, because people don't speak about like succession like this, you know, you need time, a lot of time, like ethnography. And we realized that through like these very long interviews, at one point, like in the Renoir family, it was like this, when she said like, it is like Sally Claude, that's incredible. When she said that, this daughter, and she was not the only one, like to realize after a 3-hour interview that they get disadvantaged. And we realized also that in families, like spouses, like female spouses, but also daughters, sisters, so women as wives, daughters, sisters, they are the ones speaking in the family, trying to find the family peace. And it's very costful for them to go against this family strategy of social reproduction that are unfavorable to them. And we realized that they were not vocal about it because they put like family peace first. And in one chapter of the book, there is an extraordinary story of two brothers like fighting each other. It's through emails and letters, and it's super violent. And what the sisters and mothers, because there are different mothers, do is like to calm things down. And this is something that we learn to do as women, like we are socialized to do that, to communication in the family, make people together, put people together, speaking about things, not get irritated, not screaming, not fighting. And I mean, here you can see that it has like economic consequences in the family. Yeah.
Sarah, I was just going to say, is there anything you want to add from any of the questions so far? Okay. Peter?
We've got a question from Anna Gibbs, who's a barrister and guest teacher in medical law at LSE. Anna's asked, in terms of the cultural shift being discussed, what role does financial education of children, in particular girls, have? Both teaching them in broad terms about gender inequality in family structures, but also by teaching them to positively assert their rights, their desire for or rights to equal portion of that wealth. And do you think this should be on the primary or secondary school curriculum?
Yeah, of course. No, you want to Yeah, I would like to thank Sarah Trotter for her discussion, because I think the question of the way family members relate to law is very important, and it's quite an answer to this question, because when we met these families and the different family members and female members, it's like with tax law. It's tax law. It's the state will take your money, the money of the family. It's not some rights, you know, and you can fight for your rights. So I think it's very important, and yes, it's very important that people know their rights. That it's rights, and that for the question of what do you do with your money? For us, it's a very difficult question, because there is a way that our book is read in France by rich women. We are asked by some bankers, female bankers, they want to make money with this. They say we have to help women to know how to make money, to like to make money. And for us, it's a little bit difficult, because for us, what is important is how class inequalities and gender inequalities are intertwined. It's not to help rich women to become richer and richer. And we think the problem is in our society, because we have also environmental issue. It's not that women accumulate as men. It's not our purpose. So it's a difficult question.
Okay, more. Okay, right at the back. Yeah, in the middle there. I think there's a.
Thank you so much for the talk. I really liked your point about the female banker being, we should help empower women and make them become CEOs and step over men. And I think this is, because I was reading a book about this, and it's this like neoliberal approach to feminism, where it's like, let's make women become CEOs and all this stuff, but how about the 99% of the women, you know? And I think that what really matters is the economic dependency that women rely on in the house. And I think that this is where it all comes from. I mean, just to talk about not even like the divorce, like I think that if you make a survey and you will see like so many women do not want to divorce, because then it's going to be only one wage, and they usually combine the wage to have a bigger house. They will lose the house and all this stuff. But so my main question was, so you were saying that which I completely agree with, that women usually have better grades and go to better unis and have higher education, and usually they have a lower wage, so 40% lower. And if you make the economical rational approach in many households, then the man is like, okay, since I make more money, you need to go stay at the house. But I think that when there is like a divorce, I think that unpaid labor should be quantified. I think that this should be taken into account when having a divorce, because I mean, I'm talking from experience with my family. You know, my mom didn't work, and she like raised us. And I think that this is the hours that were implemented in this should be quantified when having a divorce.
Yeah. We haven't presented this part of the book here in the 40-minute presentation, but the last two chapters of the book is exactly about this. So in France, but I'm sure it exists here too, there is in the law a kind of something called compensatory benefit, which is like designed to do that, like so women are, I mean, the impoverishment of women is built in at the moment of the couple through
this specialization of men and women, and the statistics that we presented before, like the fact that women are specialized, if we can say it like this, on unpaid labor, which is not such a good specialization. And you're right, the moment of divorce is the moment when the impoverishment becomes like obvious, but also creates like major public problems, because like we know that single parent families that are actually women living alone with their children after a divorce are faced like a huge rate of poverty, and they have like a lot of material problem. And then if you look into the legal tools that we have, there is the compensatory benefit. And here it sounds great because it's like it's designed for that. Like it's supposed to compensate the impoverishment of one spouse after divorce. The problem is that in France, it is reserved to married couples. So only in case of divorce. And in France, there are plenty of couples who don't get married, that have children. And the same impoverishment and the same specialization of women on parental unpaid, parental domestic unpaid labor is exactly the same. So it's reserved to only married couples. And also it's very, very small, like small amounts, and even smaller. So this is one of the thing that we show in the book. Like in the 2000, there was a debate in France at the National Assembly about this compensatory benefit, because before 2000, it was compensatory benefit was like an amount every month until the death. In 2000, there were feminists at the National Assembly saying, no, it cannot be like that anymore. Marriage is not like supposed to be, their term was a rent, no, une rente. Marriage is not, okay, I will put it, yeah, women should not rely on marriage for their economic emancipation. That was their claim at that moment, feminists from the left wing. And then in 2000, compensatory benefits, there was a shift in the law, and then it started to be like one amount of money at the moment of the divorce, and it is over. And doing this, then you lose kind of the only tool that we had in the law to compensate the unpaid labor. So this is one of the things that we're trying to do in France, like in the public debate, and we speak a lot to feminists, like to put that back on the table. Like, okay, so unpaid labor, right? It's still performed a lot, much more by women than by men, and a lot of couples get separated at one point. So maybe that would be a good moment to bring the bill. And there was, I think in Portugal, I don't know if you've seen that, but in Portugal last year, there was an affair like this, like a woman saying, okay, it costs you this, like all I did for the children and for domestic work. And it could also be a kind of incentive for men and for couples to actually share like the duty of like the domestic labor, this unpaid labor. That we're not so successful in France, like I mean, some feminists start to speak about that. So this is the beginning of something maybe, but yeah, here we are.
I'm afraid we're running out of time, but I just want to bring in Sarah just for a final comment before we head off.
Thank you. I'll just briefly comment on that question about unpaid labour. It is a factor that's taken into account when financial laws are made when a married or civil partnered couple are separating in England and Wales. It's taken into account when financial laws are made, but financial laws aren't made in all cases. So whether or not it's taken into account in those cases is a sort of separate question. But where it is taken into account, in most cases, the resources available will only cover needs anyway, so the needs of the couple. The question of compensation can't arise because, you know, there may not even be enough to house the couple, separating couple in separate houses. So in most cases are needs-based cases. And in theory, we have this idea that compensation for lost earning capacity relating to decisions made within the marriage is something that features in practice. It only applies in a very small number of cases.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Just a quick note before we finish, just to say that if anybody would like to hear more about the LSE Inequalities Institute, please visit the website to hear more about upcoming events and to sign up for the fortnightly newsletter. But otherwise, just want to say a big thank you to our speakers and for all of you for taking part tonight. Thank you.